Hello, it's Lit Lessons with GCSE Memes once again. Today looking at Inspector Calls and looking at the character of Arthur Birling, how he is represented at the start, the middle and the end of the play, and thinking about the sort of context behind this character and the techniques used to describe him. He's a great character to look at or consider for your revision because there's loads that we can say about him, even though he is certainly not a very desirable or likeable character indeed. So, let's start by looking at who is Birling then. What do we think of when we think of Birling? Now, this is where we get some information from him in the stage directions, and it says that he's a heavy-looking, rather portentous man, rather provincial in his speech. And we'll talk about what the words portentous and rather provincial mean in a second. But this is the kind of things that I think of when I think of Birling. He's the owner of a company, factory, Birling and Co. That's probably the first thing he would use to describe himself as well. He's very proud of his business. That is certainly the case. That being said, he is less successful, it appears, than his rival George Croft, who is Gerald's father. And that's a significant thing to remember in the play because it shapes Sheila and Gerald's marriage, as we'll talk about in a bit later. He's also socially inferior to his wife, so there's a suggestion that actually he has made most of his money from working hard and working through his business, but he'll never be socially equal to his wife, who has been born into money. And he's also, a very important word for him, is he's a stubborn capitalist figure as well. And finally, and probably right at the bottom of his list of things that he mentioned about himself, he's a father, and he is quite an uncaring one at that, or certainly he is portrayed as being quite an uncaring father in the play. Now, I mentioned that we come back to the words mentioned in the stage direction, and I think they're really important because portentous means trying hard to impress, but provincial means unsophisticated and narrow-minded. And what this immediately suggests is these two kind of contrasting words suggest to us that he's ultimately trying hard to be impressive and to be this kind of rich, successful figure, but he's kind of failing at it. And his narrow-minded views and his unsophisticated way of speaking basically means that he is unable to be that impressive figure that he wants to be. So that's the first sort of things that I would make sure that I remember if a question on Birling was to come up. That's kind of him summed up. But now let's have a look a little bit more at him throughout the play and the kind of things that he says and the things said about him by other characters as well. So we'll start by looking at him at the start of the play. And here's the words that I would use to describe him at the start of the play. A complete buffoon, someone who's completely stupid. And he repeats twice that the Titanic is unsinkable, even though the audience, who would have started watching this play in 1945, knows it was sunk soon after the play was set. He's patriarchal, which basically is a posh word for someone who is kind of happy with man ruling over women, sexist in some simplistic way of putting it. And this is evident because he seems way more concerned with the money he will gain from Sheila's marriage by her marrying Gerald Croft than the actual character of his future son-in-law. He's also incredibly arrogant and a bit of an elitist and a capitalist at that, and he actually calls the idea of community nonsense and boasts about his potential knighthood. That's what's really important to him throughout this play, the idea of status, of being the best. But ultimately, the audience at the time, I think, are intended to find him quite exasperating and quite boring. He has a number of really long speeches whereby he lectures other characters and condescends the younger characters. He comes across as this kind of person who thinks he knows it all, but actually knows very little indeed. So that's him at the start of the play. Now, the next part we're going to look at is when he meets the inspector, kind of in the sort of middle of the play. And immediately it becomes very, very clear that he's quite tight-fisted. He's quite strict with his money. He refuses equal pay to the women in his business, and he uses the phrase, "Of course, I refuse them, of course," suggesting that this is quite a natural thing for him to do, to refuse people money when they suggest or request pay rises, or in this case, where women ask for more equal pay to their male counterparts. He's clumsily threatening as well, and this becomes quite clear as he mentions that he plays golf with the chief inspector to try and stop the inspector that we see in the play from asking questions. Obviously this doesn't work. The inspector replies, "I don't play golf," which shows that he will not be intimidated by Birling whatsoever. He tries to hide the reality of the world from Sheila, not for her benefit, but actually for his own benefit. Basically, when Gerald is talking about meeting Daisy Renton at the Palace Bar, where there are women of the night, prostitutes, he says, "I see no point in mentioning the subject," and points at Sheila behind her back, which immediately suggests that he's trying to stop Sheila from seeing Gerald's infidelity, his cheating, so that the marriage goes ahead and he makes as much money as he possibly can from it. As well as this, he tries throughout the middle of the play to gain power over the inspector. He constantly uses the imperative, "Look here!" But he's completely ignored by the inspector, and ultimately gains no power back from him whatsoever. So that's him in the middle of the play, okay, during his own inquiry, the inquiries of the other characters as well. Now, at the end of the play, we see Arthur again thinking that money fixes everything. He says to the inspector, "I'd give thousands to basically change what happened to Eva." Again, he hasn't got this idea that being nice and compassionate to people, no matter their gender or their class, is what's important. He thinks that money speaks rather than kindness. He's more worried about himself, and that's very evident once again at the end of the play. He's worried that he's going to lose his knighthood as a result of all this stuff happening. He wants a meaningless title, essentially, and he thinks that's more important than the life of this innocent victim. It's very clear he does not learn from his mistakes, like Sheila and Eric. His mood when it appears the inspector is a fake changes once again to one of relief and joy. He actually goes as far as laughing at his children, who are still emotionally affected by everything that's happened that night. And ultimately, because he does not learn from those mistakes, he is punished for not learning. They're left in real trouble at the end. They've called up in the infirmary and asked about the suicide of a girl just before she arrives at it. So it appears the inspector, through his kind of supernatural ways, has sent the death of a young woman to punish these characters for not listening to his message and listening to his teachings. Now, have a little bit of a look of this chart here. This kind of summarises what I've just said there, the start and the end, how basically Arthur's situation changes to some extent, but ultimately him as a figure and his personality doesn't really change. So pause the video here, get these little ideas into your notes, okay, because they'll help you of course with your revision, and we'll move on in just a second. So, as always, I'll provide you some questions that you can have a go at, which are great practice before your examinations. So, we've got the standard sort of character question there. In what ways is Arthur Birling important throughout the play? As well as a theme question, explore the significance of selfishness in Inspector Calls. I will provide the full text in the description as always. Don't forget to mention your context in these if you want to hit those higher marks, because they are essays that do require that. Alright, so do mention what kind of sort of historical things influence this text. As always, I end my video with a meme. This is linking to the thousands that Arthur Birling wishes he'd provided Eva, and to some extent probably one that provides Sheila to protect them from the horrors of the outside world, but ultimately, you know, it's useless. He needs to learn actually that money isn't important. It's kindness that would be a better shield to those terrible things. More videos are being released often now. Okay, please do make sure you like and subscribe to this channel, and comment any content that you want me to cover, any meme templates you want me to use in my memes at the end of my videos. Check out our Instagram as well. Thank you.